Mr. bin Laden, you have declared a jihad against the United States. Can you tell us why?
The U.S. government has committed acts that are extremely unjust, hideous and criminal through its support of the Israeli occupation of Palestine. And we believe the U.S. is directly responsible for those killed in Palestine, Lebanon and Iraq. Due to its subordination to the Jews, the arrogance of the United States regime has reached the point that they occupied Arabia, the holiest place of the Muslims, who are more than 1 billion people in the world today. For this and other acts of aggression and injustice, we have declared jihad against the U.S.
In 1996, bin Laden was expelled from the Sudan. He returned to Nangarhar in eastern Afghanistan, as there were few other options available at the time. Afghanistan was still at civil war, but Nangarhar at the time was relatively peaceful. Bin Laden enjoyed the protection of a local commander, Engineer Mahmoud, whom he knew well from the Afghan-Soviet War. In addition, al-Qaeda still had access to a cluster of training camps in the coast. The training camps were under the protection of the local government there, which was connected to the Zadran tribe of Jalaluddin Haqqani. At the time of bin Laden's return to Afghanistan, the coast government had already joined the Taliban. In practice, this made little difference, because the Taliban left it up to the local government to run the affairs in the province. Shortly after his return to Afghanistan, bin Laden declared war on the United States troops in Saudi Arabia. Bin Laden's anti-American sentiment had been building up for some time, in part caused by the stationing of U.S. forces in Saudi Arabia, most notably Mecca and Medina, after the First Gulf War in 1991, and due in part to his own failed attempts at reforming the Saudi Arabian regime. His expulsion from the Sudan in 1996, which was caused in part by U.S. pressure on the Sudan, appears to have been the last straw. Shortly after bin Laden's return to Afghanistan, he activated al-Qaeda's training camps in the coast and started targeting Saudis and Yemenis for recruitment. At this time, bin Laden had not yet centered into a formal alliance with the Taliban, but enjoyed the protection of a local tribal leader in Afghanistan's periphery. Bin Laden was determined to fight the war against the United States, even if he did not yet formally have sanctuary with the Taliban. Initially, it appears that bin Laden envisioned a guerrilla war against the United States troops in Saudi Arabia. In practice, this would mean a campaign of terrorist attacks carried out by a clandestine organization trained in Afghanistan to send back to Saudi Arabia. There were two major challenges. First, bin Laden did not have a large following in Saudi Arabia. He had around 100 followers in Afghanistan, but almost none of them were Saudis. If al-Qaeda was going to start a guerrilla campaign in Saudi Arabia, they literally had to start from scratch. The second challenge was that bin Laden's call for jihad did not resonate well with dominant perceptions of militant jihad at the time, neither on the peninsula nor elsewhere. Militant jihad in the 1990s took two main forms. First, there was the view that jihad against apostate rulers was more important than jihad against foreign invaders. This view was promoted by, amongst others, the influential Jordanian ideologue Abu Muhammad al-Makdisi. It was operationalized by large revolutionary movements, such as the armed Islamic group, the GIA in Algeria, and the Egyptian Islamic Jihad and Gamma Islamiyah in Egypt in the 1990s. By calling for attacks on the Americans, bin Laden argued for prioritizing the original infidels before the apostate rulers. This was hard to accept for militants who had grown up looking for revolutionary Islamists as their heroes. Besides, there were authoritative Islamic sources, including the Quran itself, arguing that near enemies should be prioritized. Then there was the view that fighting the foreign invader should take precedence over fighting apostate rulers. Abdullah Azzam was the proponent of this view, which had been coined classical jihad. The classical jihad was operationalized by the Afghan Arab movement who fought the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in the late 1980s and by foreign fighters in Bosnia and Chechnya in the 90s. To make his arguments resonate with Azzam's views, bin Laden framed the Americans as foreign occupiers by referring to the presence of American military troops in Saudi Arabia. This also meant that he had to declare the Saudi regime as apostates, because it was the Saudi regime that had invited U.S. troops into the country. The argumentation itself was not new. The so-called Sawa, the Awakening, movement had declared the presence of U.S. troops in Saudi Arabia illegal already back in 1991. The Sawa was generally not interested in armed jihad. Bin Laden's attempt to tap into the grievances of the Sawa thus resonated with the radical friends of the movement only. As for the classical jihadists, they generally viewed the Saudi regime as legitimate. The regime had even sponsored and assisted classical jihad in Afghanistan, Bosnia, and elsewhere. Bin Laden's 1996 declaration of jihad on the United States thus fell between two chairs. It did not resonate with revolutionary Islamists who believed that near enemies should be prioritized. It did not resonate with the classical jihadists who believed that Saudi royal family to be legitimate Islamic rulers and who therefore preferred fighting abroad. Al-Qaeda needed to demonstrate the power of their own narrative. They needed to convince the Muslims that their agenda was sound and that it was feasible. Only then would bin Laden be able to attract the number of recruits needed to build up a clandestine organization in the Arabian Peninsula or elsewhere for that matter. But how should they do it when Al-Qaeda did not yet have the operational network in the peninsula? Al-Qaeda activated its strongest military asset at the time, a dormant network of experienced operatives in East Africa, and tasked them with carrying out an attack on American targets in the region. This is how international terrorism became part of Al-Qaeda's strategy. The concept was not really new. Al-Qaeda simply returned to the core task of spreading the sentiment of jihad by carrying out professional yet daring attacks and promoting a culture of martyrdom and self-sacrifice. Al-Qaeda may have reasoned at this stage that international terrorism was a far more effective way of harming the United States than guerrilla attacks against U.S. targets inside the peninsula. They may also have resonated that international terrorist attacks would kill fewer innocent Muslims than attacks inside a Muslim country. But ultimately, the choice was taken as a result of many contributing factors, not least the need to launch Al-Qaeda's agenda during a time when few would have been interested in, or could not even fathom, that there could be alternate ways of waging jihad. The East Africa operation could not be understood in the context of military strategy alone. Al-Qaeda had not yet built an organization in Afghanistan at the time of the attack, and they spent their most precious military asset, the East Africa network, on one single attack. Al-Qaeda's networks in East Africa were dismantled after the attack, and remaining members relocated to Afghanistan. Al-Qaeda then had to spend time building up a new attack capacity. Why not build the organization first, and then carry out a more intensive attack campaign? This supports the interpretation that the main purpose of the East Africa operation was propaganda. Like almost all terrorist attacks, the East Africa operation was shaped by coincidences and human mistakes. The attack in Nairobi killed a large number of Kenyan Muslims, which was probably not part of the original plan. A few Al-Qaeda operatives, including the senior Al-Qaeda member Mohammed Siddiqui Ode, got arrested at the attack and handed over to the United States. At the time of the attacks, Al-Qaeda also lacked a clear propaganda strategy. No one filmed the operations, and none of the suicide bombers recorded their testament prior to the attack. But in the end, even the failure seemed somehow to work in Al-Qaeda's advantage. The large number of casualties in the Nairobi bombing ensured that the attacks generated huge media attention. The testimony of Mohammed Ode and others attested that made sure that bin Laden was indicted in the case, and thus he became an instant celebrity. The United States even sent cruise missiles to Afghanistan to try and kill him. The Taliban, for their part, refused to expel bin Laden from their country, arguing he was their guest. Luckily for Al-Qaeda, the Taliban did not suspect or did not want to know about bin Laden's direct role in the attacks. Bin Laden was ensured continued protection in Afghanistan under the Taliban. By 1998, Al-Qaeda had successfully launched its war on the United States, and from now on, they were focused on two activities in Afghanistan: organization building and continuation of the international terrorist campaign. The two activities were mutually reinforcing. The international terrorist campaign strengthened Al-Qaeda's image, boosted their credibility, and helped draw recruits to Afghanistan. The organization building made it easier to select and train suicide operatives for the international terrorist campaign. The period between 1999 and 2001 was a period of huge expansion, thanks in part to al-Qaeda's alliance with the Taliban regime.